So, let me guess. You are trying to send a text message to someone in the United States and you ran into a blocker. Regulations. Right when you were planning to build your app. Bummer. No, don't fret. We'll get you through them. Those regulations that you bumped into are called US A2P 10DLC. And in addition to sounding like a spoonful of alphabet soup, they're the solution that the United States is employing to completely eradicate SMS-based spam and phishing attacks. And every single builder out there who is attempting to programmatically send SMS in the United States is required to deal with these regulations. Now, I don't know about you, but when I hear the term regulations, I immediately get filled with teenage angst and I want to yell, "You can't tell me what to do!" It makes me want to slap one of those "skateboarding is not a crime" stickers on everything I see. But of course, adult me knows better. There are good regulations. And I'm betting if you stop and think, you can identify at least one that you really appreciate. Like, here, I'll tell you one of my favorites. The regulations around food safety. I'm so glad that those are in place. I really don't like food poisoning. So, in the next little bit here, I'm going to work on getting you through this process as seamless and quickly as possible. We'll discuss the current landscape, the terminology, and of course, most importantly, how to get started compliantly building your SMS-based app. I don't know about you, but I've been getting more and more spam lately. No, I don't want cheap Ray-Bans. And these phishing attacks that try to grab your personal info are getting super advanced. Like those one messages where they address you wrong on purpose, like hoping that you'll correct them. Did you know a phishing attack over SMS is called smishing? I love that term, but I really dislike the bad actors doing this. I mean, we all do, right? And things kept getting worse. So in 2021, an ecosystem was formed between carriers and providers to solve these issues. And it introduced A2P, which stands for application to person. Now, if you and I were to text each other, we'd be using P2P, or person to person. But what we're talking about here is when you send code to send the messages. That's application to person. 10DLC is 10-digit long code, which is the area code and the remaining digits. Now, important to note here, these are local numbers, not toll-free. We'll talk about those other numbers later. The idea here is that all traffic that ever goes across the A2P 10DLC route will be compliant. And so what does that look like? Well, every message will be verified, meaning that it's confirmed to be sent from who it says it is, and wanted. The receiver of the message has opted in to get this kind of message. It sounds pretty dreamy on the person side of things, doesn't it? And what's cool about that for you on the application side of things is that once your registration is approved, you can build your app exactly as you need. And your messages will get to your customers faster and more reliably than they ever did before. Everyone wins. Now, all we got to do is get you registered. Now, in order to do that, we're going to need to let the ecosystem know who you are. This is called a brand. And the brand is, well, you. The brand helps the ecosystem verify that the message is coming from who it says it's coming from. And campaigns are your use case. You most likely have multiple use cases that you're planning to use messaging for. So you can have multiple campaigns. This is how the ecosystem ensures that the messages that you are sending are wanted. Your campaigns are registered with the campaign registry, and this is a central point of truth for everything on the A2P 10DLC route. This is referred to as TCR, or the campaign registry. So, one more time. Brands are who you are, and campaigns are what you're sending. Now, I realize that you might not associate the word campaign with what you're planning to do with your Twilio number. So, it's important just to think of that like your use case. Naming things is hard. Anytime you send a specific type of message, you need a campaign for that specific use case. Let's take a look at how you do that. Before we dive in here, just a quick word of warning. My right now is definitely different than your right now. You're living in the future. I hope it's going well. The flow that we're just about to go through will for sure be improved and different. We're always making things better for you. So I have this page here in our docs that's attached to this video. Not only will it contain all of the relevant links, it'll also call out anything that's a little bit different from my right now to yours. Make sure to check out the notes. It's a great place to start diving into these docs. All right, let's get your brand registered. There are some instructions that I'd like to walk through together. There's a link to them in the notes, but let's start from the docs. So here I am at the docs. I'm going to click in here. And if this is your first time in the docs, I am so excited for you. They are so wonderful. I'm collapsing things over here until it comes up A2P 10DLC. I'm going to click on this overview link. Our docs are incredible, and our docs team is incredible as well. Our team are pros. They're literally the best in the biz, and they do an excellent job of breaking down complex information. So here's the overview page for A2P 10DLC. Now, we've already covered these bits here, but if you're into the written form, this is a great refresher. I want to take a moment here and figure out what type of customer we are. So if we come down here to determine your customer type. Now, this is important to think about, and most likely you are a direct brand. This is where you're sending messages on behalf of your business to your customers directly. Now, you might not have ever thought of this before, but it is possible to provide messaging as a service for your customers. So you could provide Twilio for your customers. This is called an ISV, Independent Software Vendor. We love this customer type, and it might be you, but you probably already know it if it was. Here, in case it's hard to grok, I'll use one of my favorite examples, Slice. So Slice is an ISV that enables mom and pop pizza shops to be able to send text messages. The individual mom and pop pizza places are Slice's customers. Slice calls it a reverse franchise. So these individual pizza shops sign up, and the parent company sends out messages like, your pizza's ready, like on behalf of the pizza joint. And the ISV in this case is providing access to the messaging technology without requiring a developer to make it happen. I love it. I love the idea, and I love pizza. And finally, if all this talk about businesses and companies seems to be way too far in the future, chances are you might be a sole proprietor. Now, this is for students and hobbyists, and we're huge fans of what y'all are building, and we understand that you might not be a company yet. Let's talk through these a little bit more as we go through this flowchart here to determine what type of brand you should register. I'm going to expand this flowchart here, and we're going to see that it's going to start asking, are you registering to send messages on behalf of yourself or your business or on behalf of your customers? And of course, if it's for yourself, you're a direct customer. And if it's for your customers, remember, this is the ISV use case, that you go this way. Now, the reason why that's important is because you have to do this registration for each of your customers, each of your brands, right? Each one of those pizza joints, in Slice's case, needs to register a brand because that's what the receiver of the text message is wanting to verify. They don't know about the parent ISV. They know about the specific pizza place. Okay, so we're direct, and then we get to an important question, and probably one of the most important ones. Are you using Twilio to send messages from a US 10-digit long code number to people in the US? If you're not doing this, you don't need to register. This is only needed if you're sending from one of those local 10DLC numbers to someone in the United States. So if you are, and you don't have a tax ID, now we're not talking about social security numbers. What we're talking about here is like EIN. If you have an address in the US or the Canadian address, you can register for a sole proprietor brand. And if you don't, it's suggested that you think about a toll-free number. Now, let's pause here for a second. Toll-free numbers are pretty great. They currently aren't affected by the same way these 10DLC routes are, and they very well may be something that you'd like to consider. If you really want a local number, like a specific area code, that makes sense. But if you don't have a pressing local number need, you really might want to check out getting yourself a toll-free number. There's a different registration process, and I've linked to that in the notes as an alternative. All right, so now let's take a look at this route where you do have a tax ID. All right, so the next question is, how many daily message segments are you going to be sending? And you'll note that it says segments. Remember that S in SMS stands for short. Messages are broken into 160-ish characters. So this is a message segment calculator. And messages that are longer than 160 characters end up creating multiple segments, and that is something you might want to think about before making this decision. So there's 155 characters here, so I've got one segment. So you can see that things can add up pretty quickly. We're at 2 segments, and we can say, especially if you use emojis. So we're still at 2, and I'm going to pop an emoji on here, and you'll see that it takes up some extra space. And now we're at 4 segments. Whoa. So now, how many message segments do you plan to send? Fewer than 6,000 a day? Now, next, a question is one of throughput. So this is how many message segments that you can send per second. In a person-to-person situation, this used to be limited, but our new A2P style opens up some really exciting possibilities. What you want to think about here is how timely your messages need to arrive. If you want to send a large blast of messages all at once, you probably want to think about a high throughput. Now remember, your messages will get queued up and we'll take care of sending your messages out at the right frequency. If you don't need a high throughput, low volume standard brand here, that's your choice. And of course, if you're going to need to send more than 6,000 or you require a higher throughput, you're looking at a standard brand. Now, because of these lifted limits, there is a required secondary vetting of your registration, which comes with an additional one-time cost. In fact, let's peep those costs real quick. Let me show you where you're going to be hanging out for a bit. And I'm here in my console, and on my left-hand navigation, you'll see that I have this thing here called messaging. If you don't have this, you can click Explore Products, and you'll see messaging, and you'll want to pin it to your sidebar. You definitely want to have this pinned to your sidebar. So I'm going to open that up, and I'm going to scroll down over here. I'm going to see this regulatory compliance. I'm going to open that up, and I am going to click on this overview. This is a good place to see everything going on. Now, I have some announcements here that you might not have. This is where I register and where I check my status. It's my home base. If I scroll down here, you'll see that my current package, I've signed up to have a sole proprietor package because I made a tiny little app here. And you'll see that there's this compare packages link, which I think is a wonderful way to check things out. So you'll see that here's the 3 brand types that we just talked about. We got the sole proprietor, which I've registered for. We have the low volume standard, and we also have the standard. And what you'll see is each of the rows here are specific to each one of these columns, right? So I don't have an EIN, so that's why I'm here. I'm made a little builder app here. And I'm not planning on sending much, which is okay. So I'm going to send less than 3,000 segments per day. If I was low volume standard, there's 6,000. And then of course, standard is greater than that. Again, I can only do 1 message per second with my sole proprietor account. And with my low volume standard, it's low. It depends on what you register for, what this number will be. And then high, of course, this is what you want, probably if you're sending a lot of messages at once. Now, for the fees. This is where you get to see the pass-through costs. Now, to register a brand, it's $4. And with the double vetting, there's an extra $40 that's required. Again, this is a pass-through charge for a secondary vetting. These types of accounts can send a lot of messages all at once, and it's important for the ecosystem to be able to fully trust that you're going to play by the rules. Now, we trust you, and we need everyone else to trust you as well. Next up, we have a one-time campaign fee. And of note here, additional fees apply if the campaign is resubmitted. So you want to make sure that we don't do that because that could get expensive. So we'll talk about strategies for making sure that that doesn't happen here in a bit. And below here, you'll see that there's a monthly fee of $2 per campaign for the sole proprietor, and then between $1.50 and $10 per campaign, depending on what the campaign type is. And that's per month. This is also nice. It shows the information that you'll need when you start registering your brand here. So if this is your first time here, what you would probably do is you'd head down to your onboarding, or probably actually route you here. Now, I already have a brand, and because I can have multiple campaigns, it's asking me to make a new campaign, but I already have a working campaign. Let me show you really quick what one of those brands look like. So my brand has been registered, and there'll be multiple ones in here if I did have multiple brands associated with this account. So I'm going to come in here, I'm going to register a new brand. And you'll see that as I change these fields change as well. So lots of great information on here. Take your time, read through these. And after your brand is registered, what you would do is you would submit campaigns, right? So you could come to campaigns and you would register a new campaign. And remember that these campaigns are your use cases. I highly recommend on clicking this, right? So remember we were talking about the best practices and not wanting to resubmit. Click on this. So this page is constantly updating with best practices of what we're finding across everyone registering. There's a lot of different use cases. So we try to make sure that you have the most up-to-date best practices. Please read this. Actually, while I have your attention, let me call out some of my personal faves. All right, my first piece of advice, which by the way is true for any sort of application, it's this: take your time. You want to make sure that you are completely answering the questions so that when someone goes to review it, they say, whoa, this person gets it. Remember, the whole point is to make sure that the messages being sent are verified and wanted. These fields are how that reviewer will validate that. Your campaign description should be clear about what you are attempting to accomplish, and make sure that it's aligned with your specific campaign type. This one might be obvious, but use actual messages. For the messages example, use the actual messages that you plan to send. Now, I realize that if you haven't actually crafted these messages yet, this can seem challenging. But now is the perfect time to go and write out your whole messaging flow for this specific use case. You can improve the example that you choose to share by including the actual brand name. Now, if the message contains dynamic data, something like your customer's name, make sure to mark those dynamic bits, the part that changes. Put those in hard brackets. And finally, read up on opt-in best practices. A common place where we see some approval confusion is surrounding opt-in methods. Remember, this is how the reviewer is going to ensure the wanted portion of the regulation. Does your customer clearly understand what messages you're going to send? And do they want you to start messaging them? Now, I've included some links to thorough documentation surrounding the opt-in best practices in the notes. I highly recommend checking out the industry best practices. And back to our best practices doc. These are really good already, and I know they're going to be better. They're always going to be improving. And down at the bottom of this doc, you get to see some really great examples of ways of opting in, good examples of that. I thought that I'd take a moment here and I'd show you a few of my faves. Now, not to toot our own horn here, but this is our sign up screen. And you'll see that we have an opt-in checkbox, and we talk about what kind of messages we're sending. We link to our terms and service. We explain how to opt out, and we specify fees, and we even talk about how you could expect messages from us. Now, here's another example. Now, and this one isn't a form, but an opt-in via a text message, which is common, to get messages for our annual conference Signal. This is for an old one in 2020, but we'd love to see you at a future event. You're totally invited. You'll see that this invitation still contains the important bits, like the fees, the opt-out info, and the link to terms. One thing that I wanted to make sure that I point out is that there are some things that aren't allowed. So there is definitely prohibited content on the A2P 10DLC channel. And I think it's important to point these out before you get started. So make sure that you come in here and you check out what's not allowed. What are these forbidden use cases? For example, not to harsh your mellow man, but you can't talk about cannabis or CBD, even if that's legal where you're at. We do, in fact, offer some other channels. So if you do fall into one of these forbidden ones, you can look at some other channels as well. Make sure to check the notes on this. And also a reminder that we, Twilio, also have an acceptable use policy that you agreed to when you signed up. So as you guessed, this is also in the notes as well. So after you've completed your form and you have your campaign approved and you have this wonderful green dot here, do not forget to add your number to the messaging service. So when you do this, it adds a new messaging service, right? And the messaging service can contain multiple phone numbers. So here's my messaging service for this campaign that went through. And you'll see here that I've added my number, and you can do that by adding senders. You'll see that I added this long code here. You'll be guided to do this, but we've seen some folks forget. You went through this whole process. Don't forget the last step. Oh yeah, I wanted to talk about some alternatives. So if you are sending one-time passcodes, OTP, that thing where you send digits so people can verify who they are, who they say they are, you probably aren't too excited about having to register for that specific use case. Can I make a quick recommendation? Don't. Let me introduce you to Verify. We have a product that does it for you. You don't need to write the code even. We'll take care of it. And we have the right numbers for you, and they're compliant. So you don't need to go through this whole process. And you get access to all the other channels as well. It's not just SMS. You can also go over WhatsApp or email. You can use voice. You can push notifications. You can do some device stuff. It's awesome. I highly recommend checking this out. This problem is actually harder than it seems, and we'd love you to be building what you want to build. And remember, if you don't require local numbers, a good solution for you might be to explore toll-free numbers. While they require some verification, they don't have the same fee structure. Check the notes for more on this. And there's also an API. Again, it's super important to take your time and fill out the forms to the best of your ability with all of the information that's being requested. I want you up and building as soon as possible. So therefore, the more you can focus on the recommended best practices, the more likely you are to sail through the approval process. You've got this. Now, I wanted to take a quick moment here and thank you for making our shared messaging ecosystem a better place for literally everyone who receives text messages. Hey, that's me. Thank you. Thanks so much for hanging out. I can't wait to see what you build, and compliantly.